I got my first real smartphone back in 2017, which is the Moto G5S Plus, and back then Android was a great ecosystem to buy into. When I was looking for a phone within my budget, I had access to a great variety of choices, all of which were competent offerings for the price range. The phones themselves were also really exciting. With each and every iteration, the phones would get thinner, better, and they would get more streamlined with software updates and new features. And back then, as a tech enthusiast, I was excited about smartphones, and I would watch each and every release on YouTube. But now, in 2021, along with the recent announcement of LG shutting down their smartphone division, Android has lost its focus. But more than that, it's starting to seem like, even for a once die-hard Android fanboy like myself, that the iPhone is becoming the better choice. And a quick search on YouTube shows that I'm not alone. So, how did we get here? In this video, I'll go through 3 parts. What Android used to be, and why people bought Android, the current state of Android, and then finally, what manufacturers need to do to stay on top. Timestamps are in the description, and this video should have chapters. Let's go back a few years. In October 2013, Google collaborated with heavyweight LG Electronics to unveil the Nexus 5, a poster child to showcase the new Android 4.4 KitKat. Its plethora of front-end and back-end changes made it a worthy alternative to iOS 7, which was released on the iPhone 5C and the 5S. Coupled with some impressive specs on paper and a lower price, the Nexus 5 was touted to be a worthy competitor to Apple's iPhone. And although it wasn't exactly the best device in the world, the fact that it was being sold for $349 and was competing with phones in the $550 to $650 bracket price range meant that it had an unprecedented level of value, something that, in a few years, OnePlus would make their entire brand image. There were also plenty of other phones in the market that you could buy and expect an update to KitKat for, such as arguably one of the best Note series phones, the Note 3, and the HTC One, a high-end Android phone with a great camera and great build. As for Android 4.4 itself, the major improvements that were made to compatibility, fluidity, and performance meant that it no longer felt like a clunky phone interface. It was optimized to run on phones with as little as 340 megabytes of RAM, which made it widely accessible. And on top of that, the UI had improved to a sleeker design, albeit not quite as good as iOS 7. For a consumer, when KitKat came out, you were blessed with competent offerings from both ends, Android and iOS. We'll talk a bit about this later and how it's changed today. Just over a year later, Google released Android 5.0, otherwise known as Android Lollipop, and with it, the Nexus 5X and 6P, in partnerships with LG and Huawei respectively. Once again, this was a massive upgrade, especially on the backend side of things, where the introduction of Android runtime and support for 64-bit CPUs increased speed and compatibility. The competition on the other end was the iPhone 6 and the 6 Plus. The high-end Android phones, like the Note 4, Nexus 6P, and the HTC One MA were easily able to keep up, even outdoing the iPhone in several areas. And if you were looking for a budget phone, well, you were in luck with the OnePlus One, the first in the flagship killer series, which had amazing value for money. Let's take a minute here to think about why people bought Android in the first place. Price was a very significant factor in the Android versus iOS debate. People didn't want to spend so much on an iPhone when they could easily buy an Android for a couple $100 less. And another factor was the variety. Android provided you with so many options as compared to the 2 or 3 models per year by Apple. And it gave consumers the power to dictate what they wanted from a phone and not be locked down. Customization was also a lot better on Android than iOS, although that's changed now. And aftermarket support through custom ROMs would definitely have been a factor for a tech enthusiast back then. However, one place where Android has always succeeded, and is continuing to outperform Android manufacturers, is in the marketing. Apple has had and still have some of the best marketing out there, and the biggest reason why people bought Apple instead of Android was because of the status symbol that the iPhone became. And then in 2015, we had Android 6. Marshmallow. More improvements meant that if you were an Android user that year, the selection of phones available to you was unmatched. You had the OnePlus 3, running its light yet customized skin of Android, Oxygen OS. The Samsung Galaxy S6 and S6 Edge with their big, bright displays and fantastic camera quality. And of course, if you were a stock Android kind of guy, you had the Nexus 6P and 5X available to you. Google didn't really have to do all that much to maintain their dominance. From about 2015-2016 onwards, however, the updates and features on Android 11 started to decrease year on year, and with the latest Android 11 having barely any changes, it's almost as if the number doesn't even matter anymore. Now, I get that at a certain point, you're not going to get huge updates anymore due to the point we're at. It'll just be diminishing returns. But it's gotten to the point where, in my opinion, as a manufacturer you cannot expect to go with stock Android and expect for people to be excited about it. Companies like Samsung and OnePlus have spent a lot of time refining their Android skins to replicate the seamless experience of iOS, to the point where going with stock Android feels like a real downgrade from something like One UI or Oxygen OS. So really, when you have options like One UI and Oxygen OS, unless you're an absolute purist, there's no reason for you to go with stock Android anymore. Or even the Android that comes on the Pixel phones, which, albeit having a few more features than basic stock Android, still isn't quite enough compared to what Oxygen OS and One UI can offer. Now, this isn't to say that Android phones aren't interesting or that they're getting boring, because I've seen that comment around a lot, and in fact when I was writing the script for this video, that's the mindset that I went into it with. But if you take a look around, you'll realize that Android phones are still interesting. You've got crazy stuff like the Lenovo Legion Dual 2 coming out, you've got the Samsung phones with their 100x zoom, and a whole lot more. However, I think that they're definitely missing out on a few key fundamentals. So, right now in 2021, what is the state of the Android market? Well, a lot's changed since a few years ago. LG and HTC have dropped out, Huawei is basically kicked out of the market as such, although they haven't really dropped out in a sense. There's also a greater presence of Chinese brands in the West, with OnePlus and Vivo coming to Australia. Motorola and Sony, they're just barely thriving, they're kind of on life support at this point. And the big hitters like Samsung and Google are pumping out phones year after year. Nothing that's a 100% hit, but they're great phones nonetheless. Android smartphones are really good. You've got an option for everybody, whether you're looking for a budget phone or a gaming phone. But Apple still has the dominant market share because they focus on the wider majority of the demographic. We've witnessed the once flagship killer OnePlus virtually revamp their entire identity in order to grab a part of this demographic. Appealing to tech enthusiasts may have gained them the capital and the following that they needed, but over the years they grew further and further apart from their original brand image. It was inevitable, it kinda sucks, but now we've got brands like Poco and Realme to come and fill in the gaps. Or with former innovators like LG and HTC dropping out, Nokia and BlackBerry only really having their names to license, and Huawei being basically axed from the Western market, one thing is very clear. The high-end Android market is severely lacking in competition. Let's contrast the reasons for buying an Android back then that I mentioned earlier in the video, and let's look at how those reasons have stood up today. In part 1, I mentioned 4 significant factors: price, variety, customization, and aftermarket support. How's this held up? Really isn't a reason anymore to buy an Android phone over an iPhone. High-end Android phones are on the exact same price level as iPhones, sometimes going even higher, and even the mid-range phones are inching closer and closer to flagship territory. Then you've got variety, which admittedly has stood the test of time. You've got a wide variety of phones available to you over a range of different price points, but even the iPhone is catching up, starting with the iPhone SE2 of last year. As for customization, let's be honest, Android really isn't the customization king that it used to be. Sure, if you're a power user, then Android still does edge out, but with the recent introduction of widgets and custom icons, iOS has basically caught up to Android when it comes to customization. With the announcement of Material U, which will be coming in Android 12 later this year, hopefully Android can once again become the customization king. However, I'm a bit hesitant on this because it's still yet to be seen whether the performance of the phone will be able to hold up, especially phones that get Android 12 that have older hardware. Meanwhile, the iOS jailbreaking scene has gained more popularity than ever, with new exploits being found faster than Apple can patch in a game of cat and mouse, allowing for further tweaks. Aftermarket software support is still there in the form of custom ROMs, custom kernels, and rooting. But with each update, Google continues to take steps to try and prevent rooting being possible, and many manufacturers themselves have made it inconvenient and hard to do something as simple as unlocking a bootloader. So, out of the 4 factors that we talked about, only one of them really stands: variety. This raises the question, what do manufacturers need to do? We know that Apple appeals to a larger demographic, which is why it has a dominant market share. But why exactly does it appeal to a larger demographic? I think there's 2 reasons to this: marketing and nailing the fundamentals. First, marketing. It's safe to say that the marketing gap between Android manufacturers and Apple has closed significantly, with Samsung making good use of influencer marketing through their seemingly successful BTS and Samsung marketing strategy, and Google's also done pretty well with their quiet, in-your-face marketing. However, the brand that Apple's built for themselves over the years has compounded really well into making it seem like Apple is the classy brand. Apart from that surface level marketing advantage, there's also the fact that Apple only releases 3, maybe 4 or 5 phone models a year. The naming scheme of them is also really simple. The regular 12, the smaller 12 mini, and the more advanced 12 Pro and 12 Pro Max, with the Max being, you guessed it, bigger. The occasional mid-range variant was also released, such as the SE. Compare this with OnePlus, which just last year they came out with the OnePlus 8, 8 Pro, 8T, Nord 10 5G, and the Nord N100. It's honestly a little bit ridiculous at this point. As small as an impact as it seems to have, the naming scheme has a huge effect on the branding, as it makes it really straightforward from a customer point of view. The iPhone 12, for example, versus the LG V60 ThinQ 5G. You get the point. Then we've got the fundamentals, and I know what you're thinking. What fundamentals could Apple have possibly nailed better than Android? I mean, you've already got your screen, your camera, your software. What more is there? When I say fundamentals, I'm referring to the quality of life aspects, two in particular actually. Software updates, as well as software and hardware integration. Now, anyone who's even remotely familiar with smartphones will be well aware of what a great track record Apple has in updating its smartphones. Hell, the iPhone 7, a phone from 2017, is supported until iOS 14. Take the S7 from the same year as the iPhone 7. It got updated to Android Oreo, and then nothing else. Only 2 years of software updates as opposed to 6 years. And this again just goes back to the whole thing of having less smartphone models being released each year, and therefore quality over quantity. The reason that Samsung can't provide 6 years worth of software updates like Apple is because of the sheer number of smartphone models they release each year. With that number, it would take a massive amount of development to ensure that each phone is supported for the same amount of time. It even made headlines in the Android community when the brands like Samsung, Sony, and even the decommissioned LG committed to providing 3 years of software updates. The bar is on the floor. What about hardware and software integration? In this regard, Apple is so far ahead that it's laughable. Everything about the hardware, including the processors, is designed in-house or specifically ordered by Apple to their specifications. Pair that with a fully independent operating system and you can get blazing performance and efficiency. You may have wondered how iPhones are able to get the same, if not better, battery life as Android phones on lower capacities. Well, this is why. Meanwhile, Samsung phones with in-house Exynos chips still perform worse than their Snapdragon counterparts, which is kind of embarrassing. This could be attributed in part to the huge restrictions imparted by the Android ecosystem on manufacturers, but it'll be long before that changes. Google has announced that they will be producing their own chips, but given their track record, it remains to be seen whether it'll actually be successful or not. Another downside to variety in smartphones is third-party support. You may have heard of the stereotype of Android cameras being crappy, and this mainly stems from the way in which social media apps such as Snapchat and Instagram use your camera. Using the default camera app, the raw camera data is passed through special image signal processors and computer magic built into each phone to create the best looking image or video that it can. Social media apps do not have access to these features by default, and it's up to Android manufacturers themselves to enable access to these libraries. Apple's phones, seeing as that they are widely used and have a low variety, they have no problem putting in the effort. And this is where the superior Apple image quality stereotype started out. This is also beginning to change, however, with the Google Pixel 2 onwards and the Galaxy S21 starting to provide access to their respective image processing. We've now outlined all the problems that Android manufacturers have. What do they need to do then? Let's talk about a hypothetical scenario. If I was given enough capital and enough R&D, what would I do to appeal to as many people as possible? Personally, I'd have 3 models a year: the mid-range, the high-end, and the high-end Pro version. Pair these with simple names to make it obvious to the consumer which one suits them. As for pricing, looking at the current pricing of models in 2021, I'd probably price the mid-range phone at around 500 AUD, with the high-end at 999 AUD, and then the Pro version of that high-end at about 1200 AUD. When it comes to software, I'd probably go with something that's similar to Oxygen OS, but without all the slightly dodgy stuff that they've done recently, such as pre-installing Amazon and Facebook out of the box. I believe that Oxygen OS is one of, if not the best implementation of Android on a phone to date, with its light design, meaning that updates are easy to deliver and ensure for devices, although Oxygen OS has been falling off track in that regard in recent years. It is also well optimized, hence I would aim for as much software optimization as possible so that I could ensure the maximum amount of software and hardware integration with each other. Speaking of updates, obviously in a best case scenario I'd go for like 6 years, but without trying to make this scenario too unrealistic, I'd probably settle on 4 years of software updates, which anyways is the amount of time that people usually keep their phones for. In terms of hardware and features, whilst I can't exactly make a spec sheet that doesn't end up being totally overkill, what I can do is name a few key areas that I would prioritize the funding and allocation of resources towards. These areas include the cameras, display, speakers, and battery, with the reason being that this is what most people care about as well as interact with on a day-to-day basis. I also do have a list of features that phone makers should try and avoid unless they can absolutely nail it. And this list is going to be pretty short because it's literally just one thing: a 2 megapixel macro camera. Please, for the love of God, do not put a 2 megapixel macro camera in your phone unless you can make it the most perfect macro camera that's ever been on a phone, because otherwise it ends up taking precious space away from a better camera such as a telephoto lens or an ultra wide lens. So please don't put in a 2 megapixel macro camera unless it's the best macro camera ever. And if you're going to try something like Project Soli from the Pixel 4 a couple of years ago, please make it well baked, because it's just going to hamper with the customer experience. With that being said, there's nothing wrong with experimentation, but when you're going to change something as fundamental as how one interacts with the phone, you'd hope that it's well integrated. One more thing. Nowadays, the smartphone debate has evolved into much more than crappy cheap Android versus expensive restricted iPhones. Apple and Android smartphones all bring excellent innovation to the table, but it has also turned into a screaming match of who copied who. If a feature is well implemented and sells a phone, why shouldn't it be copied? It only results in the next companies trying harder, or creating a technology standard. Just a few years ago, you remember Apple unveiling the iPhone X, with its fresh notch display and integrated 3D facial biometrics. It may be surprising to learn, however, that Apple is not the first to do a notch display, as Android enthusiasts were quick to argue that Apple had copied the design of the recent essential PH1. The same could be said for Touch ID, the fingerprint scanner that debuted in 2013 on the iPhone 5S. With fanboys citing phones with fingerprint scanners produced back in 2007 and even 2004. Even if this technology wasn't new by any terms, the reach of these phones made waves, making the next trends and benchmarks for all future smartphones. It was only by the combination of these designs that future Android innovations such as the in-display fingerprint sensors, hole punch displays, and pop-up cameras could exist. It's safe to say that if Apple hadn't copied these features, you would never see them on your current smartphone. It doesn't even have to be Apple, with OnePlus starting the dash charging phase and the gaming phone by Razer pioneering high refresh rate displays on smartphones. Although, the latest trend of removing accessories such as earphones and chargers from the box is one that I'd like to die out. Okay, I know I've just done an entire video crapping on Android. Am I saying not to buy Android? No. There are still great phones coming out each year from both sides, Android and iOS. What I am saying, however, is that there's still room to improve. Android could be better. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, a sub would be greatly appreciated. And let me know what you think. What do you think Android has to improve on? Will you be buying Android or iOS for your next smartphone purchase? Let me know in the comments down below. Thanks.